Leadership, purpose, service. This is Fulfilling the Dream with Wayman Britt. Your path to greatness is not simply paved with the grinding feet of persistence. Through motivating stories and personal testimonials, gain the insight you need to overcome life's biggest challenges and break through those barriers that hinder you. So when opportunity knocks at your door, you'll be ready. Welcome to Fulfilling the Dream.
Welcome to Fulfilling the Dream. We're here with Jim Hackett today, and Jim is a longtime friend, former CEO of Ford Motor Company and Steelcase Incorporated. He also was the interim director of athletics at the University of Michigan. And he has an amazing story about family and life, living here in our great state of Michigan, and even more. So welcome to Fulfilling the Dream, and Jim Hackett is our guest today. Jim, welcome.
Wayman, it's great to be with you. And our listeners should know how far back we go to a Sunday when I'm a senior in college and I scored some tickets for the front row when the University of Michigan and Marquette were playing basketball. And you had an unbelievable game. And you're an incredible athlete and even a better person.
Thank you, Jim.
And that Marquette went on to win the national championship that year.
That's right.
And we did it to them on that Sunday. Don't want any of the Marquette listeners to get upset, but this is the guy that caused the mischief.
You bring back those memories. I tell you, that was the tougher team. Maurice Lucas and Bo Ellis and Al McGuire, those guys were tough, man.
Yeah.
But we came back the next year and we went all the way to the NCAA finals my senior year. So it ended okay.
It ended okay. Yes, sir. Well, it's great to be with you.
Yeah, Jim. And you have had a wonderful career, and we're going to talk a lot about how your ascent to Steelcase and then to Ford, and maybe you could help some of the listeners out there to understand how do you overcome these difficult issues in life and to blaze a trail, which is what you've done. I mean, the stuff you've done for Ford in particular, the autonomous vehicles and all of the things that you're doing, you've done to create a better vehicle and a life for people. Amazing work. And then at Steelcase, I know that in particular what you did for the office furniture environment. I don't know if many people know, but you were one of the folks that I got a chance to know while I was there. And we had an interesting situation one week where you asked me to help one employee who was coming in, who had been referred by Bo Schembechler. And that was an interesting opportunity to help a young man who had gone to University of Michigan. So you really, beyond just the technology, the innovation, you really care a lot about people. And you did all that you could to make people's lives better. So I want to talk a little bit about that as well. And just let's start out and talk about what was the pivotal moment for you as you began your career at Steelcase. What led you to the point that you saw yourself in that key role, becoming the CEO of Steelcase and becoming the vice chairman of the company? Tell me more about that.
Well, the beginning of that setting underscores something, which is I never saw myself in a role like that. I didn't seek it, and it's hard to talk about oneself, for me. I think probably the underpinnings of all that is I grew up in a fantastic family of 4 boys, so I was the youngest, and it was 2-on-2 everything, athletically, academically, intellectually at the dinner table. So humility was a virtue, that I truly do think about. And so when the CEO job of Steelcase was kind of presented to me, I suggested to Bob Pugh that there were better people, and I meant that. Because I was young, I had just turned 39.
Yeah.
I was really 38 when we started, and then became 39 when I got the job. And it just seemed premature, for a career. But because I didn't have it in my sights, I wasn't like accumulating the things that you need to be successful. I was just really excited about doing what I was doing. And at that time, I was doing a startup for Steelcase. It was a very creative, innovative idea in an industry that was quite successful, but didn't have a lot of new ideas, particularly not new business models. And so the board saw that innovation at the time that they had this change in leadership, and that probably raised my candidacy, and
Right.
that's what starts it.
Wow. So Bob Pugh, tell me about Bob Pugh and your relationship
Well,
with him.
Bob Pugh, it's important in that story that that I had such respect for him. He's passed on, but I had such respect for him because he was such an authentic, direct,
Yeah.
no nonsense, leader. He was kind of what Tom Brokaw calls, the World War II generation.
Yeah.
Men of few words but
Yeah.
big hearts. And so when this moment occurs that he's got to change the leader of the company, that's really what happens. He comes to see me. I was an executive reporting to the previous CEO. He comes to see me at this startup. And we had locked the door to this building because it was really a startup. We wanted no one to see what we were doing. And so he's knocking at the door and he can't get in, and he's the owner of the company, of the building. So there was a little moment of hilarity there. Well, we're in a meeting, I go, well, somebody's at the door, and our guy goes, and you got to understand, this is like in the early 90s.
Yeah.
He doesn't have any shoes on. We didn't wear ties. We were real
Right.
casual in a world where everything was formal. And so he opens the door with no shoes on, and Bob comes in and he goes, "This is kind of interesting, Jim," with a smirk. Then later he progresses in his, intent. He wants to interview me about the job, but I don't know that. I don't even suspect that. I think he's coming over to see the innovation and ask my opinion who
Right.
might do it.
Wow.
He says, "Hey, can you meet with the board, tomorrow?" I go, "What about?" "Well, I want them to learn more about what you're doing here." We had reported to the board, but again, we had kept it pretty tight. I go over to this dining room that we'd use for guests
Yeah.
in corporate headquarters. There's 2 plates. And I go, "Mr. Pugh, I thought you said I'm going to meet with the board." He goes, "You are." So that made me laugh because, this is the man. and there was a board, but it was Bob's decision. And so in the course of that discussion, it was kind of an interview, but a discussion about life, about values,
Yeah.
about the company. And we get to a point where he says, "I think I want you to do this." And I said, "Well, I have to go talk to my wife and think about it." Again, I didn't have the desire really
Right.
to do it. And I took a week. In fact, he called me in the middle of the week and he says, "I'm beginning to worry
Wow.
you can't make a decision."
Yeah.
And I barked at him.
Wow.
I said, "Well, how'd the last decision go?"
Yeah.
And
Unbelievable.
and this is the kind of relationship I had with him, which is I could confront the thinking of somebody I respected so much, and he allowed that. So this is one of the things in leadership is, are you willing to hear others? Yeah, he was. And I made no mistake how strong he was and how emphatic he could be. But when I challenged him, and it wasn't the first time in retrospect that I'd done that, the mutual respect grew. And then, of course, I made the decision to do
Yeah.
it.
Did you see it coming? Did you have any inklings that potentially you were going to be asked to serve in that role, Jim, at all?
No. The only thing was I had a peer group of people that I respect so much as well that would meet. They were, I had a corporate role before I did this startup, and we would gather peers to try and work on processes that crossed our domains.
Yeah.
And a couple times, different people said to me, "You ought to be running the company." And that bounced off the atmosphere for me. I thought it was really a genuine and, flattering comment, but I just never saw it happening.
Wow.
And it's true about the other 2 jobs, the athletics and the Ford job. These are things I didn't seek or want, and I'm surprised when they came.
Yeah. So you left Steelcase, and that was probably what time was it? Was about mid 2000s.
Yeah, it was 2013.
2013.
Yeah, it'll be 10 years, or no, 2014. It'll be 10 years ago this
Right.
next year.
Right.
And that decision, I was relatively young still. I was only 59, but I'd been in the job 20 years.
Yeah.
And I loved it. I loved the people. I loved it. We were rolling. I mean, we had an innovation machine that was generating ideas after ideas, and the standard for the company by the world was highly regarded.
Right.
Even before I took over, but I meant, the body of work got better, and it wasn't always like that at the beginning. And so I have a suggestion that I give to leaders, which is, when you're at that junction when you think, should I go on, you need to have kind of an in-depth reflection about it and tell yourself, this is a decision for 3 years.
Yeah.
Because if you say, well, I can do another year, then you're back in this same dilemma, which is really starting 6 months before that year ends. So you don't want to do that. You don't want the people that work for you or the company to be in a constant state of, was he going to stay or leave?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I told myself that. Could I see myself staying to 23 years as the CEO?
Right.
Again, notwithstanding the board makes that decision about your longevity, but I had found that I wanted to work on other things. And what happened, Wayman, was the topics I were interested in. I mean, I'll just share this. One was around data, the nature of data science and how big the collection of information was coming from things like Google or Facebook. You got to understand, this is 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And I saw that there was a big opportunity in mainstream business to leverage that data in new ways of working. The abstraction was so high, I couldn't get there from being at Steelcase.
Right.
And I was at a business roundtable meeting, which is a collection of CEOs that go to Washington, D.C. And we're at a luncheon, and I'm describing this idea to the number one software company in the world that's privately held, SAS, and Jim Goodnight, the founder. And this idea that I have in the back of my head, he goes, this is a really good idea, Jim. I want to come talk to you about it. I'm employed at Steelcase. And I said, no, it's just an idea. And we finished the luncheon. 2 days later, he called me. He says, I'm on a plane tomorrow, my plane. I'm going to show up in Grand Rapids. You need to be ready at 10. He reminded me of Bob Pugh, frankly.
Yeah.
And I said, no, sir, you got to understand, I don't have, it's all in my head.
Right.
I don't have anything to show you. But it had that kind of lure for that, and that's the number one data science business of its day back then. And so I realized I couldn't reach it from being inside Steelcase, and so I went on this path where I was going to do a startup around healthcare data sets. I invited Luis Tomatis, who's a local hero of mine who's passed away, and some others, and started to formulate the principles behind this. And that's when the U of M president called. And,
wow.
And I had, I just put all that on hold.
Because were you on the board at U of M at the time, or no? How was your association? How did that connection happen with your transition to
the athletics?
Athletics director, yeah.
No, I was, other than I was an advisor to the Ford School of Public Policy,
Okay.
And which a lot of, Hank Meyer was locally here was head of Meyer, and so you'd have visibility.
Yeah.
I think President Coleman, who I did know from just successive things over 10 years that she was in the job, when the sitting president, Mark Schlissel, ran into this challenge, she suggested he call me. And when he did, I said, I have one suggestion, is go back to the athletic director and work this out.
Yeah.
Because this is another leadership thing, is when there's a difficulty, and the question of talent isn't the issue.
Generally, it's not, is it?
And it's not. And particularly with these two people, they're both at the highest levels in their respective fields, the sitting athletic director and the president of the university.
Right.
So is it a matter of you two getting along? And I give Mark a lot of credit that he wanted that to work. And I said, I really can't talk to you because Dave Brandon, who was sitting in the job, is my friend.
Yeah.
And I don't want to advise you on how he should work. And I don't know, really.
Right.
So he said, okay, and he hung up. And he came back 2 weeks later, maybe, and said, I have attempted to do that, as you asked.
Right.
And the regents have decided, that they want to make a change. So
Yeah.
then I didn't talk to Dave about any of this. It wasn't my place.
Right.
But it gave me freedom to then
Right,
consider
move
it.
on. So you made a decision, and then you figured out the best guy for the head coaching position at Michigan was Jim Harbaugh. How did that come about?
Yes, and it didn't. I mean, it was such an obvious target, but I was again the reluctant leader. And there's Jim Collins has written about the reluctant leader, which can serve you well in a sense. It's not about not getting up and going to work and making decisions. Yeah. It's about questioning: Am I close enough? Do I need to learn more, listen more, ask more questions before I make a decision?
Right.
The reluctance isn't making a decision, it's making the right decision and seeing your confidence in it. I call it coming to a point of view. So I built a system for evaluating coaches that I got teased about a little bit, but let me describe it to you. I invited 3 of the most historic coaches ever at Michigan, Gary Moeller, who's passed away, Lloyd Carr, and Jerry Hanlon, who was the line coach and often color announcer.
Remember.
And I'd already announced that Brady wouldn't be coming back, so they weren't caught on, flat-footed. We went over to the football stadium and took one of the suites and made a project room. And I said, you guys, and I had somebody that had worked for me at Steelcase that was a great project manager, because I'm going to build the walls with information. And I started with a question: what makes a great coach? But each one of them had to hear this and define the virtues that were there. And we made a list, okay? And then, and just again for the audience, if it's an offensive-minded coach, is it that they know how to run the ball? Is it quarterbacking? Is it,
Right.
et cetera? Defense, is it speed? Is, all these different things that you will hear from announcers. But these were football coaches. And the speed in which we got that list was amazing. Then I just made a list of candidates that I had in pro and college and that they may know about.
Yeah.
So we have a ladder of names and a ladder of virtues. Now we make a ping pong ball, meaning a sticker that's a circle, that, like in Jim's case, JH was on that.
Right.
And we go over and we have multiples of that for just him, and let's make up a name, Sam Smith. And we go over and we put the ping pong balls by each virtue. When we're all done, we add up who had the most ping pong balls. Jim did. Now, I believe you could have intuitively done it really fast, but I wanted, in retrospect, remember I said the reluctance, that if somebody came and looked at me and said, how did you decide
that?
We had the evidence of that.
And it's proven itself to be
proven, and of course,
smart decision.
Now,
over
time, and of course, I loved the guy. Like, literally, don't know of anybody in modern coaching today that I could feel comfortable with but him.
Yeah, he's turned it around.
Yeah.
And number 2 ranked team in the country right now.
Yeah, and
could possibly be number 1.
And he's built his system, which there were inklings of this, Wayman, when he was at Stanford. Actually, I saw.
Yeah, you saw some of that.
I saw some of that, and essentially to characterize it, it's like he has a pro system in college.
Yeah.
So once I talked to Urban Meyer on the field, and who's not really forthcoming, with what he would think, but he was quite. He said, I can't prepare for him because the number of formations and things he brings.
Right.
And this is, Urban had his way with us, but Jim scared him.
Right. Well, let's move on to Ford Motor Company. Unbelievable what's happened at that company, the autonomous vehicles and the partnership with the University of Michigan. I know you're probably instrumental with all of that. Tell us about how you transitioned from that role at University of Michigan and then move into the CEO role
Yeah.
at Ford. And why did they bring you into that suite?
Well, it starts with the same kind of moment when I'm leaving Steelcase, and I knew I didn't want to be the long-term athletic director. I thought maybe I'd stay for 6 months, and I stayed 18. And there's a bunch of reasons why that just didn't fit me, even though I felt good about the stewardship while I was there. And so I was thinking about what I was going to do next, and I talked to Bill Ford about a newer idea. The data stuff, you know, I 18 months lost some traction, lost my advisory committee, and so I started to reason that maybe, and you know, I should add the time away, which is another teaching moment here. When you're a leader and it's so intense what you do, it's hard for you to get any moment to reflect on yourself and like watch a movie of yourself and see how you're doing. One reason the network groups are so healthy for us is because you get to hear others talk about what you already know you're doing. You'd think, well, I'm not getting anything from it, but it's very therapeutic.
Yeah.
Well, taking an interim assignment like that did the same thing for me. It took the great taste I had in my mouth from the Steelcase kind of dinner, first course. It was like a palate cleanser at Michigan.
Right, it was a reflection opportunity.
Yeah, and I went to Bill and I said, on reflection, I think I'd like to help you. Excuse me, I didn't say that. I said, I think I would like to help a family. And I talked to Steve Van Andel at Amway about this, neither of whom I was asking for them to endorse me. I was thinking, what do you think of the idea of families who have younger people that they want to get ready for eventual assignment, that I could help, not coach, but nurture along. And it was an ill-defined idea, but Bill loved it. And so the next day he said, you know, that thing you're talking about, I'd like you to help me. And I go, why? I'm, you know, no. Because I was on the board, I should point out to
you were
listen.
on the board at the time.
When I was athletic director at Michigan, I was on the Ford board. And so the first assignment was not as CEO, it was to help him with the future of the direction of the company and advise the CEO. And I was out of the boardroom. So when the board was making this decision they wanted to change, I had nothing to do with it.
Right.
I didn't know about it. In fact, I had a total commitment, just like I told you with the athletic director change, to the incumbent.
Right.
That's the way to be.
Yeah.
And they came to me and asked, would you take this job? And I said, no, there's better people. And so some months passed while I think they assessed that, because I gave them some suggestions. And they came back and Bill and then a couple directors said, you really need to step in here. And when you step in like that, Friday there's one individual in charge, on Monday you're the next. These are difficult things, so I can't stress enough how hard that is kind of on the ascending CEO, the one who's taking over.
Yeah.
Because you really have no credibility with the leadership team.
Right, you don't.
And you didn't pick any of them.
Right.
And they didn't pick you.
Right.
So there's a lot of work that has to be
Absolutely.
done to get those connections made, and that's what I did
Yeah.
at the very beginning.
Yeah. So that was a tough job. That's probably the toughest job that you've had, I would imagine.
Well, I in preparing to talk to you, I wanted to say that to be a CEO with all the benefits you get from that, you know, good compensation, if you feed off the notoriety, I didn't, you have to see the other side of it, which is it is one of the hardest jobs that you can undertake. And I loved hard jobs. I really loved, and what I mean by that, like the puzzle part of it.
Sure.
Because only the most difficult things come to your desk.
Right.
They aren't solved when they show up.
That's right.
And then in parallel, which we all talk about, is you have people issues. And if you care about people like I did, you're with them intently. And so I took the assignment at Steelcase, the assignment at Michigan, and the assignment at Ford because someone lost their job on Friday and I started on Monday. All three of those jobs, I was asked to kind of step in. And I look back on that and say, I could share to the listeners what it's like to step in, as I just described, and then say that upon reflecting on all three of those things, the amount of work I put in wouldn't be well known, but it was incredible. Like I only took 1 day a week off in that life because you couldn't take more than that.
You have to be prepared.
And I prepared for everything.
Yeah.
And I worked extremely hard trying to plan the way a football coach plans a script. You see these big white cards.
You gotta have a play.
I actually am trying to think ahead each week, picture myself, making stuff happen. So a quick example for you at Ford was, I need to get the vehicles connected to modems if I can get the vision of what I'm carrying around about data science. Yeah. Remember I said that?
Yes.
I brought that to Ford, not that it wasn't there, but the idea of you got to get these vehicles connected so we can realize the world that's coming.
Right.
So AI that we hear about, it would not work if these vehicles weren't connected. And now I'm really proud of that, amongst some other things that we got done there.
Yeah. So Jim, how do you stay motivated and resilient? I mean, you talk about that, what you went through. So how does one stay strong and stand tall when the duress comes?
I'm smiling. I'm smiling to my comrade across the table because I was really taught this in athletics, and I mean, for me, and I know you would draw a same parallel, maybe we should hear that first August practice, which for the listeners is the preceding of the season. I mean, the temperatures were 100 degrees. I lost 20 pounds in 10 days, because I never physically had been pushed like that.
Right.
And all my brothers on the team were feeling the same way. And so the camaraderie and going through hell together, maybe a Marine feels this, makes you closer. And then the respect you have for your ability to do that is what I would give you as the answer. So there was never a difficult thing that I didn't feel like I was prepared for. I wasn't arrogant about what I needed to do. Never had a fear, never backed down. I mean, I could tell you stories that wouldn't embarrass anybody, like when the debt rating agencies came to Ford and said, we're going to downgrade you. I came in a room, I was sick as a dog. I still had to get there and have the meeting. And I had trouble getting in the room. I was dizzy and I was really sick.
Yeah.
And I sat down and went to war, and got an extension that really mattered at that time.
That determination.
Yeah, and it just, looking at you across the playing field, I'd get that out of your eyes, so I would get strength from others.
Yeah, they call that edge. They call that the edge. And, Bo Schembechler drilled that into you. I'm sure that had a lot to do with it. Probably your dad too, perhaps. I don't know, your brothers growing up. But you find that somehow that comes up, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
You were prepared for the job.
I was prepared, and I didn't realize as a youngster that all that was building a resilience that I could do this job. The question of why, and I know people, why you don't have fear but you have a healthy respect. I got to hear the General Milley on 60 Minutes, and I loved his demeanor, because he doesn't have fear for all the things they were throwing at him, but the respect that comes out about the humility of the assignment and how important his decisions are. That's how I felt, as a CEO. You're not sitting there thinking, well, how much am I going to make next year? You never really think about that. I handed all of my comp and everything to a bank and said, I don't really want to talk about this until I retire.
Yeah.
Because my job is zoomed, laser focused on success and making things happen. And
how do you deal with the criticism? Sometimes in those jobs, you're going to hear it from either the radio agencies or you're going to hear it from, the news outlets. You're going to hear it from different folk. I know you probably have had your share of that. So how do you deal with the ridicule and the criticism?
I'll offer this, having stepped out 3 years ago of all these jobs, and I'm close to a lot of people that may be under a heat lamp, and I think, it's so silly. it's so silly that they may be feeling insecure because I know them, right? My respect is so high for Bill Ford and Jim Farley in the middle of UAW conflict. No one can knock my confidence off.
Yeah.
But the way they're feeling, because I've talked to both of them, is under attack, you know.
Yeah.
Their character, what they're paid, do they care about people?
Right.
All those things
Right.
are high standards for them. So yet when you're in the battle for loyalty and support, the criticism can get to you in a way where you want to explain yourself all the time, which means you're taking it too seriously.
Yeah.
And so the truth in that is you got to work on what you can control, which is the successes you can bring will take care of all that.
Yeah.
And I got better at that as I got older.
Yeah.
But there's a point at Steelcase, for example, there was a Monday magazine that followed the industry, and we had cut off the subscription endorsement. So they came after me personally. And I remember I never had felt that like that, and it was really hard. There's a very classic story at Ford where I stood up for somebody that the press had tried to destroy.
Yeah.
And when I did that, I got the editor to retract the story, but that reporter's never forgotten or forgiven. Wow. And so I've come under, but I now look back with pride that I know the real reason that person's picking on me, you know. And what's happened over time is the truth of what I or you stood for.
Yeah.
Those play out in a way that become the authentic record of who you are.
Yeah, you just have to hang in there. So Jim, what would you want your kids and your family, Kathy, to say about you? How do you look at family and what you would want them to say about you as a person?
Well, there's a paradox here, Wayman, which is if you try and do things for others in return for credit, then you're not really doing for others. It is not charitable. It's not giving. And this very famous theorist in human resources at Penn, you know, teaches Grant. His last name's Grant. He's worked for Google. He says there's givers, takers, and makers as personalities. A giver is someone who lives their life thinking, how can I help the next person? That regardless of your class, it's your giver. A taker is thereafter, I want everything, and you got to help me. A maker is between the two, you know, and makers and givers make the better leaders. A taker is really not a very good leader. You know, narcissism overwhelms them. So I would want to be known as a giver in that framework, and it's about caring for others. And the story I told you that I want to repeat is when I was a youngster, we had, my mother had these 4 boys, and my dad was a veterinarian. There was no one to run the animal hospital, so my mother would go and run the animal hospital and then leave us alone. So we had a lady that would stay with us. And 18 years, she would, you know, she didn't live in the house, but she was there. And she was African American, and so I'm the youngest. This became like a second mother to me, you know, how close I was to her. But my respect for her was because we had good academics in the family. And one of my brothers that went to Columbia, when we was younger, we would play Jeopardy we were all young around, it was on the television, and she would win. She would beat this brother that ends up at Columbia, you know. So, and then the way they would fight, because he would say that, you know, she didn't get the answer faster or something like that, you know, which was just the way 4 brothers are, you know. They don't want to not win. Right. So the respect couldn't have been higher. And she was such a great teacher. Well, one day, the animal hospital, which is around the corner, had a rat infestation. And it's because of all the foods and stuff they had, they were trying to get in and eat all this stuff. So they brought a crew of people to eradicate it. And she was petrified of rats. Because I had stayed at her home, and it wasn't great. And so I have a feeling that, she had to interact with rodents at some time, and she was petrified. My wife's petrified of different things. And I said to her, don't worry about it. I was 10. That's way over there. They're not going to come here. I was trying to calm her down. Unbeknownst to me, to pick on her, the person that I won't smirk, who's passed away, comes running. It wasn't anybody related to us. Comes running to the door, pounding on the door, saying the rats have gotten loose and they're coming in your house. And she ran upstairs and locked herself in the bathroom. And he followed her and took his belt and put it under the door to and so there was a moment where she was devastated, and I'm punching him, like I saw racism in full technicolor at that moment. And it could have been someone who wasn't of color, and it still was wrong, right?
Right.
I want to freely admit that. But I don't think that's what was driving it. I think it was power and trying to control her.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget her in that moment. And she came out, I hugged her. We couldn't be closer to her. My proudest moment is she goes on and becomes the town librarian.
All right.
Got her college degree.
That's fantastic.
And then my brother, who one of them was a physician, took care of her, in her life before she passed. And so Wayman, it changed me in a way as I thought about a giver here. How can I help all kinds of people? And I know we're in a time frame in our lives where this challenge is being challenged.
Absolutely.
But I'm undaunted about this, because when I get with folks and I get to talk about, I never really share that story, but I did with you because I want you to understand where I come from. And so in helping the community, it's not an activist position, but it is, where can I do what I did as CEO to help people get an equal playing ground? That's all I want to do. I want them to get the chances that I got, and then they're either good at it or not.
I think that's admirable, Jim.
Yeah, and so I'm motivated, and you and I are working on some things.
Yeah. And so tell me, how can we make sure that everyone's dreams are fulfilled? Tell me what your ideal would be. What would you say would be the number one or two things that we all could do to make all dreams come true?
Well, I have a very close friend, David Kelly, who founded a company called IDEO, and now is the head of the D School at Stanford, and he's in his 70s, and he wrote a book called Creative Confidence. There's a TED Talk of David Kelly, Creative Confidence. I urge everyone to read it, because the dreams come from your ability to imagine a world that's not fantastical, it's just different than where you are. David's written about, and there's a lot of science to this, about how that infuses people with the energy to realize the dream. So my contribution to your series on this is get confidence that the dreams aren't outlandish, that the freedom for you to be who you want to be is unbounded. The second thing is you can choose to be the kind of person in that dream that people will want to be with or not. And so I have a phrase, I used at Ford, we have to choose the kind of people we're going to be so that it becomes the company we want it to be. And so I do believe that there's a parallel world. The Bob Pughs, the Gerald Fords, the Bo Schembechlers taught me is that you got to choose to be extremely full of integrity. You can be short and fast. You can be tall or fat. You can be any kind of person, but if you have this core engine of integrity, the people will trust you and follow you. So confidence for unbounded and the kind of human you want to be as my suggestions.
Yeah, right. So what would you tell a young aspiring leader today? What are the things that you would ask them to try to become? How would you ask them to model their lives?
Well, the way I would approach it is I'd be giving them that talk that Wayman Britt and people I know about, some of us come from very humble backgrounds. I grew up in a very small town. My wife's father worked in an auto factory.
Yeah.
And we haven't forgotten, that we were very happy then. To the leader, I would say, so don't look at your stake today as dictating what you're going to be. A. B, have confidence, as we just talked about. C, think about the kind of person you want to be in that. The only thing we didn't get to go into deeply is how hard you're going to have to work now.
Yes. But
don't fear that, because that helps the confidence side if you prepare and you work hard. And so what happens if if I build a home and I go visit the people setting the tile, and there's a genius in the room, I know this, and I sit and talk to him, and I marvel at how hard he works to make it perfect.
Yeah.
And I tell him that, and I say, do you know we're the same? I was a CEO, but I worked just as hard as you're doing setting the tile. It's just different. And you might say, what is that? It's the preparation. I'd have to read maybe 10 books a week, in parallel, to keep trying to learn about different ways and different methods to integrate into my thinking.
Yeah.
When did I do that? I was running the company. My wife would be sound asleep, and they were on the nightstand, and I would work till midnight and get up, early the next morning, start all over again. I would plan the first 5 days of my schedule that following week. I would go through every hour thinking about the meeting I was in, visualizing what I was going to learn and what I could do to keep things on track. I would role play myself, make notes. So then when I got in the meeting, I wanted to make sure, because I could get unfocused abstractly.
Yeah.
That was how I would stay on tact.
Right.
And I have all those notes. I've kept them all from 30 years of what I was trying to do.
Right. That's helpful. That is so huge. I mean, you think about it, it's more to it than just thinking about it, dreaming about it. It's the hard work, it's the tactics that you use. And you've shared a lot here today, Jim. And I want to thank you for being on our show and looking forward to the reaction from those who will listen to it. I hope that your transition back to Grand Rapids, now that you've left Ford, and the work that you're going to be doing with your foundation is a wonderful time and well spent. We're looking forward to our partnering together. So thank you all for joining Fulfilling the Dream, and we look forward to our time again when we talk about how do we pursue our dreams. And thank you, Jim, for being on our show today.
Thank you, Wayne.
Thanks for listening to Fulfilling the Dream with Wayman Britt, the podcast that gives you courage and confidence to fulfill your dreams. Discover the riveting personal account of Wayman's journey in his book, Fulfilling the Dream, My Path to Leadership and Finding Purpose Through Serving Others. Available in print and audiobook. If you haven't done it yet, subscribe to Fulfilling the Dream wherever you get your podcast. Share this episode with others. If you think you don't know them well enough, do it anyway. Be bold. Make a connection. And if you have a powerful story to tell, let us hear it. To get connected, visit fulfillingthedreampodcast.com.